Welcome to this final installment of the Exceptionality series. And so today we're going to focus on behavior exceptionality. This category is defined basically as follows. So it's specific behavior problems over such a period of time and to such a marked degree that it adversely affects the educational performance, emotional or social performance of the person who has the issue. And in that, we sometimes see an inability to build or maintain interpersonal relationships. Excessive fears or anxieties are also included in this group. If the child has a tendency for compulsive reactions, that might be in this group, or an inability to learn generally that's not related to all of the other categories that we've already outlined. Otherwise put, any externalizing or internalizing factors that are impacting the student's ability to cope. Okay, so how do you get to this identification? For me, it really reminds me of a diagnosis of, you know how Alzheimer's diagnoses are only done by elimination of all other possible explanations? And that's why I left behavior for last, because I feel like first and foremost for behavior, you have to rule out all of the other issues. So just as we don't identify a learning disability unless a child has had an opportunity to receive some intervention, we wouldn't move to behavior exceptionality unless the child has had the opportunity to receive some intervention. So before moving to this identification, we would expect that the problems warranted a school team meeting, and you've had probably some experience and some attempts at resolving problems within the classroom yourself. We'd expect that, and I realize this is really hard, but we'd expect that you would have looked over some behavior data to see if you could find patterns with regard to why the behavior was occurring in the first place and find some solutions. In these children, you'll have noticed that they're having difficulty focusing, they might have anxiety in the classroom, or they might have poor self-advocacy. Okay, and the team, I would assume, would have likely requested an assessment of the educational achievement. So your resource teacher could be requested to do it like a WJ, Woodcock-Johnson. So you might have put in a request for a behavioral assessment. I put that there because it does make sense. And I also realize that you probably don't have access to that. But sometimes we put things that are recommended even though we don't have access to them, and that helps highlight the need for changes. So I added it there. You might ask for a psychoeducational assessment to rule out low cognitive functioning or underlying learning disabilities, as I mentioned previously. You really want to make sure that if the child has low cognitive functioning, we're aware of that. If the child has a learning disability, we're aware of that. And most of the time, we'll identify the child under that category rather than behavior, and then just identify them LD and roll the behavior in, or identify them MID or DD and roll the behavior in as something we need to deal with. It's very rare that you only find a child who has no underlying academic difficulties, no lack of cognitive ability, and they just have behavior, but they're out there. Part of this process also is going to involve you talking to the parents about how difficult the behavior is at school. So what might psych ed look like for a child like this? So in the end, they would simply, and it would be a psychological assessment, or it could be a pediatric assessment. In the end, they might be diagnosed with ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, reactive attachment disorder, anxiety, or depression. So why do we identify under this category? The goal of this is to decrease inappropriate behavior and increase positive behavior. It's also to help the child acquire new skills. So acquire problem solving, conflict resolution, self-advocacy, we'll see later, just any lagging skill that's required, to help the child transfer skills to other settings, and to increase opportunities for successful integration. So unlike the MID and the LD categories, which we find are fairly fixed, it is possible for children to use this category temporarily until their symptoms have resolved. And we do see that sometimes when children are in an unstable situation, that They come into the behavior category and we deal with that. But then when the situation stabilizes, they no longer need that extra support. When identified under this category, placement is variable. So it is often within a regular classroom setting. And you might have some withdrawal depending on the complexity and the severity of the behaviors. You might have resource. You might have indirect support. So that is when someone like me maybe talks to the teacher and consults with you with regard to what to do next, but doesn't work directly with the child. If the child has externalizing behaviors, and we talk about this a lot, and so I'll just take a little aside, externalizing behaviors are those that you see, so they're external, and internalizing behaviors are more the anxiety and depression, so that affect only the one individual, and they're less outward, so they're less, I want to say less bothersome, and so we forget about them sometimes, but this is the category that they would be included in. So if your child has externalizing behaviors, there might be some alternative programming for teaching interpersonal skills. And if the child has anxiety or depression, you might be incorporating some self-advocacy skills, some social skills, things like that. This is my takeaway. If they could succeed, they would. If they could engage positively with you, they would. If they could relax and not worry about things or not obsess, they would. If they could look at things more positively, if they could cooperate, they would. So it's a really well-known fact in psychology and well proven that humans always follow the path of least resistance. So we're like rivers. We'll go the easiest route to get to where we need to go. So if a child is behaving in this way, let's say that I find extremely irritating, it helps me to cope with that by thinking that if they knew how to be better and not irritate me, they would probably do that. At the end of the slide deck, I have case studies of what a typical ADHD, a child with ODD, child with conduct, and I think I put a child with anxiety. But what I wanted to focus on for this presentation were the strategies, because like I said, most of the time, these children are assessed and fall under other categories. And so it didn't make sense to me to do a full feedback meeting just on, let's say, ADHD, because the process would be explaining that they don't have LD, they don't have MID, they don't have DD, to get to this part here, which are the recommendations. So first and foremost, you're going to make sure that the curriculum is appropriate. So I'd be really remiss if I didn't remind everyone that this first step is making sure that the curriculum is achievable for the child. So this step will help the behavioral situation from getting worse. It's really, truly why I feel like an assessment by the resource teacher using the WJ is very important. So we want to know, based on a standardized measure, which I feel like everyone's pretty comfortable with in terms of that term. So not only the standard score to compare them to their peers, but also in this case, using the RPI. That probably only means something to resource teachers, but that's a relative proficiency index. It tells us how easy or difficult it is for this child compared to other kids. So if the curriculum is too difficult based on where they're functioning, this will only make that behavior worse, and it will be really difficult to manage their behavior. So attend to their learning needs. Once that kind of curriculum piece is taken care of, the most important thing to do, secondly, would be to build a relationship with them. It's much easier to push away, argue, and defy someone who doesn't mean anything to you and who you don't have a history of reinforcement with. And I don't want to be too technical with that, but that means that when I'm around, good things happen. And as a result of that, I don't mind being around you. And so then that behavior that comes up threatens that a little bit. And so it tends to be more difficult to behave in that manner. So create a relationship with the person, become socially reinforcing to them. So I feel happy when you're around. This obviously won't make the problem disappear, but it is the next important step. So you can create a bridge to better participation in the classroom by just kind of being there. So that means take an interest in them. Take a moment, and you don't want to be overwhelming and be right in their face, but you'll take a moment here and there just to point out to them that I see you, I'm noticing you. I notice you always wear that hat. Like, is there a story there? Uh, and they might say, no, it's not. And then that's it, you're done. So there's no kind of repercussion for behavior that comes out of your attempts to engage with them. If they've written something, you might say, oh, like, I see that you're really interested in elephants. Like, why is that? And as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking sometimes questions can be a trigger for kids. And so you might want to leave the question out. You might want to just make the comment like, oh, I notice you're interested in giraffes, and just leave it at that. Or, I noticed you're playing with a particular friend. I hadn't met that friend before. So you're showing an interest, no strings attached initially. So when the child is less reactive to you, then you can add in expectations. Okay, so you can do this most easily by having possibly like a morning check-in and then an afternoon checkout where you determine with that child what their goal is for the day. So today, let's say my goal is to stay attentive during math class. If the child can pay attention for 15 minutes at a max, then you might say, today maybe your goal is to pay attention for 20 minutes, and we're going to look at that just in math class. So in that way, you're trying to build up the child. So you're not asking them to be attentive all day, not a percentage of the day, which makes it really long and possible to kind of lose the game or fail, so to speak. And if they fail, then that impacts your rapport because they're very sensitive to failure. But ask them if they think they can do one little piece of the school day following a change for, let's say, like I said, paying attention. And the rest of the day, you don't comment on it, but you really pay attention to their effort during that period of time. And at the checkout, then you'll note, like, I did notice that you did this, and I saw you do this, and I saw you use this strategy to try and stay on task, but only in relation to that one little piece. So for example, if it's a child who never stops moving and your goal is to get them to use a fidget toy rather than move around the class all the time, in the morning check-in, you could ask if they felt it was possible to use a fidget toy instead of moving for like one particular 10-minute block. Then you reward that and notice it. So that is going to help build rapport, and it's going to help the child feel like it's achievable. So from that point forward, we'll move, and that's what I mean by building on success. We'll move forward based on, let's say you were able to do that for 15 minutes in math. Maybe the next time is 15 minutes in a different class, 10 minutes in a different class, maybe 20, 25 minutes. So only ask what you think is possible and reward that before moving on to a more challenging request. I think one way of dealing with behavior in the classroom when one child has a behavior is to realize that not all of your classroom problems rest on the shoulders of that one child. So don't let the child with the behavior identification be the scapegoat. Sometimes your own classroom management is problematic. And I know that's hard to kind of look at, but sometimes that's the truth. And sometimes other kids are contributing to problems as well. So I recommend that for the whole class, in service of the class functioning, but also in service of the child with a behavioral exceptionality, to try and adopt a collaborative problem-solving approach. So I provided a link there in the handout that I think Sarah can probably or has already added to the chat. In essence, so collaborative problem solving is very similar to one-on-one problem solving, where you identify the problem, but here you really flesh it out and you see what the problem is from everyone's perspective. But you do that with ground rules, right? So everyone is respected, everyone feels safe, there's no talking when other people talk, no laughing at suggestions because we have a problem, and the only way we can get at it is if we can hear from everybody about what they feel the problem is and why they feel there's a problem. Then after you identify the problem from all perspectives, including the teacher's perspective, then you can brainstorm some solutions. And they can be fun, they can be silly, all of the solutions are great, but we're not going to evaluate them until everyone has had a good sense. This usually creates a lot of excitement in the classroom. And so usually the teacher should be writing these down. And once we have all those solutions, we start evaluating them to see like what might work, what might not work, and allow the children to really participate in this, to try and solve the problem that oftentimes the teacher is presenting. Then we can kind of come up with a solution. The one caveat is that, or the one kind of limitation is that everyone has to agree that that's a good solution for them. And we don't move forward with a solution until everyone feels it's a good solution. So what you're doing here, not only is you're solving these little issues that you're having, like maybe, not listening to, not walking properly in the hallway, or not listening to morning announcements, or being too loud during a particular time, but you're also modeling problem solving for the child who has behavioral difficulties, who often does not know how to deal with their problems. Okay, so it transfers over, and you would teach the kids that anyone can do this kind of problem solving for any kind of problem that they have, and that you would encourage them to bring forward problems in class so that we can engage in collaborative problem solving. For both externalizing and internalizing behaviors, if the behavior can be well defined and occur so frequently or so problematic that they need to be analyzed, then we need to do a functional behavioral assessment. And it's not rocket science. There are forms to fill out, although an FB is more of a process than a form. But a teacher can engage in this process by getting a good ABC chart. And so I'll share one of those with you following the session, one that I really like because it has a list of options for the antecedents and a list of options for the consequences. Just to try and find what might be triggering the behavior happening before, and what could be some of the consequences that are helping that behavior stay put, or as you say, just maintaining, so a maintaining consequence. So your goal here is to find out why that behavior is occurring. Is it occurring mostly in an effort to escape something, so either social situation or an academic demand, or is it mainly because the child's seeking attention? And so are they often receiving attention following their behavior, even though it's possibly in the form of negative attention? So doing the FBA or portions of it is worth a try. So this is kind of the form I will share with you. So it's already in kind of your handout, but I'll give you the full version of that. Determine what skills are lagging in the child. So this is also Ross Greene's collaborative problem solving approach, but specifically the analysis of lagging skills. So it's just another way to look at this to help yourself help the child to examine what skills he's missing. In this model, the lagging skills are reframed as unsolved problems. So you basically find the problem, try to solve it using a problem solving approach, and then the child will have improved, not completely in their behavior, so the behavior as such doesn't go away, but a little piece of the problem has been solved. And then you would go to the next one and the next one. So if you keep working on individual skill building in this manner, then the child will inevitably move forward. So what we do in behavior is, in essence, what we tell you to do with children who are struggling with the curriculum. We say break it down into little pieces. We do the same thing with kids with behavior. What are those little component pieces, prerequisite behaviors, in order to complete the full task, which is being a student who's behaving properly in class? Sounds really simple. So just recognize and praise improvements and praise them. Be really specific though when you praise. So you wouldn't say, "Oh, you were really good today." You would say, "Really like the way you helped me pick up after math today." Or you might say, "Oh, for an anxious child, I love the way you took a chance and spoke up during literacy today," as opposed to something more general like, "Oh, you're coming out of your shell," which really doesn't pinpoint what it is they did differently. So providing rewards for positive behavior could also help very young children. So if you're my JKSK teachers, the social reinforcement from a teacher might not be enough yet. And so at the early phase, you might be looking at physical rewards for those behaviors. Super important to understand that providing an externalized reward is not harmful for the child who doesn't already have this intrinsic motivation. But if they have the intrinsic motivation, the external rewards are not as necessary. Next slide. I think I've said it probably for every exceptionality. Let's set up a routine. So have a consistent daily schedule for your students. This helps for kids who have opposition because it's just the way it is, so they don't necessarily have to oppose it. And it also helps for internalizing children. So the anxious child really likes to know what is going to happen next. You can also ask the children and change the routine as a solution to a specific problem that you're having, following the collaborative problem-solving approach. Ooh, this is a really good one for oppositional children. Offer choice. The oppositional child is reactive to dominance. So just the fact that you're the teacher makes the child reactive, as we saw with the emotion coaching model. So don't put yourself in that situation. Observe the child, comment on what they're doing genuinely first, like I see you're doing this, looks like this is fun. Then clearly indicate the demand that has no flexibility. So if I need you to take out your math book would be the demand, but then follow with choice. Like, do you want to sit here to do math or do you want to sit in the beanbag chair? You'll probably get, I want to sit on the floor, something completely different. That works, right? So your ultimate goal is that he takes out his math book. The choice and the control makes that possible. And I think that is also a good example of this next one, which is pick your battles. So you're not going to argue about the math because that's what you want. And so you would be ready to go to battle over that, but you're not going to go to battle over where he's going to sit. So a good rule of thumb is if you aren't prepared to die on that hill, don't even mention it. Just so you know, the child with ODD is the expert in negative patterns of interaction. They've been working on it since they've been little. And so they're going to out battle you in that sense. So it's very comfortable for them to argue with you. So they will seek that out. So definitely prioritize what you want to instruct them to do. You're going to ignore minor behavior problems until you get the big stuff sorted out. Another little tip is to use start rather than stop requests. So that is like, do this rather than don't do that. So kids with ODD and ADHD, because they move around a lot and because they argue so much, are often told like, stop doing that, like stop moving, don't, like and it's very fresh in my mind because I was with a child for a day and a half who wouldn't stop moving, and I felt myself doing a lot of stop requests as opposed to start, and it's really hard because they're always kind of touching things. So this actually maintains the opposition because they have so many opportunities for negative interactions. So the way you can try and help that is, whenever possible, do this, right? Please sit in your chair as opposed to stop moving. Please put your pencil away rather than stop biting on your pencil. Yeah, teach problem solving. I've said it before on 2 slides, I think, for collaborative problem solving and the lagging skills, but problem solving are very important. So we're going to teach these skills. I will also send something called RIBI. So relax, identify the problem. It's just an acronym for following that process. Now, for the anxious children, teach positive self-talk. Conduct reality checks with perfectionism. So you'll emotion coach, like, of course, you're upset that you got 90% because you're aiming for 100 and you worked really hard and you're disappointed. But then the reassurance, the reality check comes after. So, really in reality, 90 is very good compared to other people in the class. And in general, it's really accepted. So don't forget that piece. Adjust assignments to reduce distress as needed for the anxious kids. For all behaviors, emotion coaching is useful. So try and practice that. Also find the child's strengths and interests. So if you have an oppositional child who is really good at I don't know, taking pictures, then make sure that that's highlighted and other kids see that. As you see, like the next slides are all kind of the different cases. So if you're interested, you can feel free to kind of scroll through that a little bit, Sarah. So just like an ADHD child, yeah, I don't think I need to read that because I think we're definitely done and I want to leave room for questions. And so those are some classroom supports specifically for ADHD that I hadn't mentioned previously. And then the next ones, I haven't added extra recommendations because I think I covered the basics. That's the criteria for oppositional defiant disorder. This is an example of conduct. And the defining feature of conduct, which is just ODD plus more vengeance and aggression. We didn't talk about reactive attachment disorder. I know you tend to see your fair share. So those are children who haven't attached properly to their figures, their caregivers early on in their lives, and that makes it really hard for them to find people reinforcing. So they would fall under this category. And anxiety disorder, which people often are reluctant to use the behavior category for, but that is really what it's there for as well. I hope you enjoyed this presentation on behavioral exceptionalities. See you next time.